All right, I'm Thelisha Eaddy, and we've taken a bit of a hiatus from politics. I think some of us needed it. But now we're going on almost 2 weeks since our primary, and we wanted to circle back and talk about what we saw, its impacts, and how it could impact our future elections here in South Carolina. And joining us here at the South Carolina Public Radio studio is our very good friend and political commentator, Antjuan Seawright. Thank you for your insights today.
I'm so happy to be with you, and it is always a pleasure to talk about something I love and something so impactful as politics, particularly in 2020.
Absolutely. I'm glad you phrased it like that, because this past summer you and I had a conversation where you mentioned that the road to the White House runs through South Carolina. So on February 29th, we saw exactly how crowded that road was with all these voters here pushing Joe Biden closer to that goal. What were some of your key takeaways from our First in the South primary?
Well, let me edit. I said in 2017, the road to heaven and the White House runs through South Carolina, and everyone should make sure they stop. Look, no Democratic nominee since 1992 has went on to be the nominee without winning South Carolina, with one exception, 2004, in which neighboring Carolina son, John Edwards, who was the former U.S. Senator from North Carolina, beat John Kerry here, but went on to be on the ticket that year, if you remember. And since 1992, no candidate has won the Democratic nomination with having a broad coalition with African-American voters being the nerve center. So in 2007, when I wrote the op-ed piece in BuzzFeed, I wasn't off base at all, as we know now, because I knew 61% of the people who cast their vote here would be African-American, 55% women. There was no state before South Carolina that was going to have those type of voting demographics participate. And so while the world was so fluttered with the results from the first three contests, I said, just hold your political horses and get this thing to South Carolina where you will see it leveled out. And as a result, we saw the impact that South Carolina has on this nomination process and what it has done from a trickle forward effect. Without Joe Biden having a handsome victory here in South Carolina, he would not have had the impact he did on Super Tuesday. Everyone, most people had written the political benediction to his candidacy. It was on hospice when it came here, but I think he came to South Carolina and received the needed and necessary rehab and received the political IV needed to keep pushing down the political highway.
You called it a handsome victory. Was it normal? 48% of the vote? You're shaking your head no. Why?
It wasn't. Look, I worked for Hillary twice in the state. We lost in 2008 with a convincing victory for Joe Biden, but the field was not as wide.
Right.
In 2016, I worked for Hillary here in the state. We had a very, resounding victory here, but there were only two candidates. You had 4 or 5 candidates in the race, and Joe Biden still came away with a very handsome victory. That sent a very strong message to voters in Super Tuesday states who, by the way, who were already early voting. And number two, who most people thought that he was going to go into Super Tuesday limping because he did not have money and did not put together a ground game of any type of campaign infrastructure in those places. But yet he came along and had a very handsome victory again in Super Tuesday. And I think from there, you saw the endorsements pick up, you saw the money pick up, and he's going into the second phase of Super Tuesday with so much to gain and very little to lose.
We also saw a lot of new registered voters here in South Carolina, and during our coverage of the primary, we talked to a lot of people who talked about how Democratic local county parties and the candidates worked really hard leading up to February 29th to register people. Do you think we will see a change in who the Democratic voter in South Carolina is?
Oh, I think the country changing, and therefore South Carolina changing as well. We, for the first time in the state, have 1 million registered people of color. We saw that, I think, demonstrated in the participation in the 2020 presidential preference primary. We also saw a surge in the urban and suburban areas of the state, something we've never seen before. We superseded 2008 turnout in the 2020 election. No one thought we would supersede the turnout in which you had Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton on a ballot in a very convincing primary here in the state, but we superseded that. Charleston County, for the first time, outvoted Richland County in terms of participation. You saw surges in 11 counties that made up over 70% of the participation in the state. That says everything about the growing demographic changes in the state, and I think the mood and temperature of the South Carolina voter. Although we do not have registration by party, I think you saw independent thinkers and Republican voters participate because they wanted to have a say-so in what our democracy looks like as it being shaped by way of the Democratic nomination process. And I'm convinced the turnout we saw in Charleston was very reflective or flirtatious of the turnout we saw in 2018 for Joe Cunningham's historic and convincing victory in the 1st Congressional District.
Do you think it will indicate something in the very popular, if I can use that word, race with Senator Lindsey Graham defeating his or trying to maintain his seat from Jamie Harrison?
Oh, I definitely think it's a snapshot and a preview of what's to come. There's no way you can have 1 million people of color register in the state who will likely lean Democratic based on historical trends and not put that toward future elections, whether it be local races or national elections that we will see, i.e. in 2020 with Lindsey Graham's race. I think while everyone agrees it could be a tough battle, but everyone also agrees Jeremy Harrison is the toughest candidate to take on Lindsey Graham. And so it's going to be a race. It's going to be a battle. I think all of the races you see across this state in 2020 at the local level and those who have national implications are going to be in such a way that people did not expect them to be as intense. And so all eyes, I think, again, will be on South Carolina as it was in the primary.
I saw a tweet you made this morning where you referred to South Carolina as that political sweet spot.
I say that all the time. Look, I wrote several op-ed pieces from the time Donald Trump took office up until a week before the primary about how South Carolina was going to change the political landscape. And thank God my intuition was not wrong. And we literally have changed the game. And you can give credit to the highest ranking African American member of the U.S. Congress, Jim Clyburn. He was the game changer. Nearly 50% of the people who showed up to vote in the primary on February 29th said they were influenced by Jim Clyburn's endorsement. You cannot turn down the volume on what that means. And so I knew because of his gravity, he had already told me privately that he was going to make an endorsement. So I knew when that was going to happen. When it happened, it was going to change the game and change the country. And by golly, it sure did.
There has been conversation about Representative Clyburn someday soon stepping down with the power or the power of the seat that he holds, because he's held it for a very long time. Whoever replaces him, what will they need to do?
They will need to attempt to be 0.1/10 of what Jim Clyburn is. There's no one in this country, and I will even say this, and I know I may take some pushback from this. He arguably is one of the most, if not the most, consequential elected official in the history of the country, by far in the African American community, with the exception of Barack Obama. He is by far the most consequential because, as Barack Obama said shortly after he was elected in 2008, when he speaks, the entire Congress listens. There's no other elected official around the country that has had or has the kind of impact he had on this presidential nominating process. And you can use that as people who dropped out of the presidential race or elected officials or former electors. No one's had that kind of impact. And I think that says everything about his service and what he's built up, the reputation he's built up of being not just a progress maker, but a product maker.
I want to go back to South Carolina's importance in this process. There are conversations about changing the order in which states vote. What are your thoughts on that?
I have mixed feelings about it. Those conversations today, to me, are very mute. Because we're in the middle of this nomination process, and we need to see this through. I think at some point we are going to have to reevaluate the calendar. I still hope South Carolina will maintain its first in the South status. because I think that's important. I'm not a big fan, per se, of South Carolina being first because I don't think that matters, but I do think it's important for us to be first in the South, and because traditionally many of the states that follow us are southern states with similar voting demographics, so I think that's important.
So we're about in the middle, if we can say that, about in the middle of this nominating process. What are your thoughts on the endorsements that Joe Biden is picking up, and your thoughts on this now, what everyone is calling this two-person race, even though Tulsi Gabbard is still in the race?
Well, when the pundits in D.C. and New York, who have no touch with reality, as I do, and most of us do, when they were writing the benediction for his candidacy, I said two things. Never count Joe Biden out. And there will be endorsements, and there will be endorsements that matter. And I think starting with Jim Clyburn's endorsement, it mattered. And I think some of the other endorsements that he received along the way, now Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar, most of the former candidates in the race, I think those things just add more gravity to how this race is going to shape up and what it means for the country. This is not about one particular individual. This is not about one particular wing of this party. This is literally about the future of this country. We do not only have to take back that temporary public housing unit at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue called the White House, but we have to win governor's races and state legislative seats, because those are going to be the places in which redistricting will happen. That will impact this country for the next 10 years. We have to win U.S. Senate seats as Democrats, because if and when we win U.S. Senate seats, we can stop or have impact on judges that will be on the bench for 30 to 40 years. All these things matters, and so that's why the top of the ticket will have much impact on what the middle and the bottom of the ticket looks like.
We were talking a lot about Joe Biden. What about Bernie Sanders?
I think Bernie Sanders has a role to play, definitely, in this process. I think he's made this party better. I think he's made this process better. And I think he's going to help us get a better product as Democrats. And make no mistake, if he is not the nominee, we're going to need Bernie Sanders' full-blown support, the support of his surrogates, the importance and the support of those who follow his message and follow him. It takes a village to raise a child, Thelisha, but it also takes a village to win elections. And we saw what happened in 2016 when we did not have a combined effort of the two separate entities under this Democratic Party tent work together for common good.
Antjuan, Seawright, thank you for your reflections today. I really
I'm so
appreciate
happy
it.
to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.